Can you imagine working your absolute ass off, clawing your way back from homelessness, only for your asterisk on family asterisk to try and steal the very home you bought? The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, but the sheer audacity of my family trying to seize my home after they'd watched me live on the streets, that ignited a rage I never knew I had. This is a story of how I fought back, and how their entitlement ultimately unraveled their entire lives. Look, I know this sounds absolutely insane. Believe me, if I didn't live through it, I'd call total BS too. But this is my asterisk life, and these are the unbelievable things that happened to me. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and my younger brother, Dan, is 29. He's already got 4 kids and another one on the way. His wife, my sister-in-law, let's just call her SIL, we do not get along. She's one of those people who loves to act superior, constantly trying to provoke a reaction. But if you dare to retaliate, she instantly transforms into the most extreme, self-pitying drama queen you've ever seen, capable of conjuring tears on demand. And the worst part? My parents and Dan absolutely adore her, despite knowing exactly what she's like. I mean, she's good-looking, I'll give her that, but her personality is so ugly I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get a job, even with a college degree. My mom willingly helps with the kids all day, so their entire finances depend on Dan. That means they've been stuck living at my parents' 3-bedroom house, which was built in the 60s. Privacy, as you can imagine, is non-existent. Growing up, Dan was always a golden child. He's 3 years younger, but developed a superiority complex because I was always harshly punished if I ever stood up to his antics. My parents openly favored him, giving him the lion's share of everything. It got so bad that other relatives started calling them out. To escape the gossip, my parents packed us up and moved 150 miles away, a 3-hour drive that kept most family at bay. Dan was physically abusive, even flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me. He'd laugh at any misfortune I had, and my parents would just tell me to suck it up. The only time I got equal treatment was when they wanted to keep up appearances for nosy, gossiping relatives. It was actually kind of funny to watch them force themselves to treat me well on birthdays and Christmas. They'd threaten to take all my stuff if I dared to expose them. So when I turned 18 and moved out, before I'd even finished high school, mind you, they celebrated. Couch surfing was 1,000 times better than living with them. I went low contact, and they didn't even show up for my high school graduation. Honestly, I didn't care. Then came early 2020. The pandemic hit me hard. I lost my job, and my roommate lost his too, so we couldn't afford our 2-bedroom condo anymore. I loved that place, but suddenly I was staring down homelessness. I had to sell almost everything I owned, realizing then that I probably shouldn't have lived such a high life without a safety net. But I had a plan. I own a truck, simply because I've always loved trucks. I found a decent $1,000 camper, put it on the back, and figured I'd live in it temporarily. I had no idea it would become my home for far longer than I ever imagined. My first thought was to park the camper at my parents' house, where Dan and his growing family still lived. But when I asked, they flat out refused. Full house, they said, and honestly, we hadn't gotten along in a decade. They only offered to let me park there if I paid them what amounted to apartment rent. It was an outrageous amount just for a parking spot, especially when I was jobless, trying to save every penny of my unemployment. They called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike. And SIL? She found it absolutely hilarious, pointing and mocking me alongside Dan, calling me a homeless bum. That first night, I parked in a store lot, terrified someone would break in. I barely slept. All my other relatives were too far, and my friends lived in apartments. I was attached to the area, didn't want to leave, but there was nowhere for me to go. Finding a stable parking spot was a constant struggle. I dealt with beggars, drug addicts, and even some random person claiming to be HOA who threatened me. I wasn't even on a residential street. To keep my refrigerator cold, I learned to sneak around, plugging a long extension cord into random outdoor outlets, a crummy thing to do, I know, but I had to survive. Months later, I finally landed a new job in a neighboring city, not retail this time. I practically lived in the forgotten backlot of the warehouse. My boss loved it. I was always available for shifts as long as I got enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up so I could drive freely. No one ever bothered us. I worked nearly every day, plugging into the building for power and water, and paid a small rent by working free on Sundays. I showered at a friend's or the gym, using the warehouse bathroom for everything else. The night security guard, who's now one of my closest friends, would let me in. Summers were brutal without AC, but a used portable unit made it bearable. I was making good overtime, learning new skills. Midway through that year, I landed a supervisor position, making more money than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. Losing my condo had terrified me. I needed stability. I found a 3-bedroom manufactured home just 2 miles from work and somehow negotiated $10,000 off the asking price. I poured nearly my entire savings into the down payment and got approved for a loan. Finally, no more camper living. I backed my truck into the yard, took the camper off, and set it up as a little building, just in case. Once settled, I made the mistake of bragging on Facebook. A few weeks later, my parents, Dan, and his family showed up at my new house, completely unannounced. I still don't know how they got my address. None of my friends fessed up, and no other family had visited. I wondered if they'd stalked me from work. It wouldn't have surprised me. The moment I opened the door, they shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists, immediately making themselves at home. They poked around every room, and SIL kept flashing me this creepy smake. I didn't know it then, but I'd soon find out why, and it would make me angrier than a bull stung by a hornet. My parents kept going on about how much extra space I had, too much for someone without a wife or kids. Then kept remarking on how it was bigger than their parents' house, and closer to his job. Red flags everywhere. Eventually, Dan asked to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly filed out onto the front porch, and that's when it clicked. This was planned. Dan, his name now official, said the house was too much for me alone, and I should let him move in. His wife was pregnant with kid number 5, and my house was much closer to his job. He actually pointed out that I already had the camper, so I could just live in * outside, while they lived in * my * house. Not once did he mention offering rent. He even started talking about changes, curfews, and how I couldn't just walk into my own home without notice. If it wasn't my brother, I would have thought the man had lost his mind. But Dan had lost his marbles long ago, thanks to our parents treating him like the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he just talked over me, as if my opinion didn't matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent to him or his nasty wife. I'd seen this exact scenario in online videos, thinking it was ludicrous, but here I was living it. My family fit the bill for narcissistic, entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone, set it to record, and just held it. Then didn't even seem to notice or care, just kept waving his arms, listing all the reasons he needed my house. Then he acted like it was a done deal, reaching out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally found my backbone. Hell no, I said, loud enough that he actually stumbled backward. I'd rarely raise my voice to him like that because my parents always punished me for it. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine could shine as brightly as it wanted here. I stood up and told him my house was not up for grabs, acting like I'd just let them move and wouldn't make it happen. I bought this house for me star. It wasn't my fault he kept having more kids and couldn't afford to move out of our parents' house. Then got right in my face, not quite touching me, and said I didn't deserve the house, that he needed a better place for his family. I laughed in his face. That's total bullshit. I worked hard to buy my house. Of course, I deserve it. He started yelling that I had no wife or kids. I didn't need all this space, so I should just give it to him. I snapped back. I'm not giving you anything. You didn't even offer to pay rent. I'd still be covering the entire mortgage for my own house, a house I wouldn't even be allowed to live in. Then pulled out the ultimate trump card. He shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our parents said I was going to do this. I roared, as if their word is low. I told him they had no right or power to give away my house. Right on cue, my parents and SIL barged back in through the front door, surrounding me, trying to force me to agree. The fighting escalated. From that point on, I heard the line, "Just do it for Dan," more times than I could count. I told them all they had no say in my life or my house, and to get out before I called the cops. SIL screamed the loudest, reminding me she was pregnant again, and I couldn't do this to her. I shot back that I'd done nothing to her. She just assumed she could take and take from me, like I would just allow it. I had no obligation to her or her family. Then I called her a stuck-up bitch who'd never shown me an ounce of respect, so I didn't care what she thought or how many kids she had. I had zero sympathy. She wouldn't be living in my house. Well, that sent her into a rage. She attacked me, landing one good hit on my face before Dan held her back, kicking and screaming. She kept demanding he let her go so she could scratch my eyes out. The phone I was holding had recorded pretty much everything. I held it up and said if they didn't leave right away, I was calling the police. My parents, looking panicked, told Dan they were leaving. My mother, with a last desperate plea, said I had a week to come to my senses. I told her, I won't be, and don't come back. To SIL, I warned that my phone had recorded everything, and if she tried anything, I'd press charges for assault. She screamed at me, then stormed out, loudly crying into her hands. My mother was the last one out the door, repeating, "You better do this to Dan and SIL." My response was simple, I won't be. By the way, if you're still with me and on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next unbelievable stories I've got coming. The second they were gone, I went straight to social media and posted the entire story for the whole family to see. It spread like wildfire. I knew my parents would try to twist the narrative and make me the villain the moment they got home, but I had about an hour's head start, and more importantly, I had video evidence to back up my story. No, I won't be showing the video here, so don't ask. Being preemptive worked. I got a fair number of family members on my side immediately. My parents, Dan, and SIL must have been all set to write their own twisted version, but it was too late. They barely even tried to lie. A few flying monkeys initially supported them, but most of our relatives already knew how entitled they were, so what happened was quickly understood and accepted. I did get one call from an unknown number, ranting that I was a horrible brother and needed to make way for a real family man. I just ended the call and blocked the number. That was the only one. A week later, just as my mother had promised, my parents showed up with Dan at my front porch. They rang my doorbell incessantly and pounded on the door until I finally answered. I opened it just a crack, and they immediately tried to shove their way in again. But I'd installed a couple of latch chains and braced my body against the door for good measure. My father and brother demanded I let them in, but I told them I was recording everything on my security camera and would call the police if they tried to force their way in again. My mother calmed them down, then in her most sickly sweet tone, asked if I was ready to let my brother move in. I told her and the rest of them to F*** off and never come back. My mother immediately put on the crocodile tears, asking why I can't just do this for Dan, because he's my beloved brother. I just laughed. I do not love him as a brother, I said bluntly. He treated me like shit for years, and you only encourage him to do so. You are terrible parents, and he is a terrible brother. Then I told them to leave, or I'd be calling the police ASAP. They all left surprisingly easily, apart from my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dainty looks. It was almost suspiciously easy. I thought the whole mess was over, but I guess I should have taken them more seriously, because they had other, even dumber plans. Later that week, I came home on a Friday evening to find a moving truck, and my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family. They were actually moving their stuff in. Dan saw me and waved with a sickening, shit-eating grin. I was furious. I yelled at him and his entire family to stop, but SIL just smugly said, "Like it or not, we're moving in." Then, in the fakest, most condescending way, while tilting her head and puckering her lips, she said, "It's okay, because my mommy allowed it, and you should always listen to what your mommy tells you." I seized with rage. Just hearing those words, looking at her smug face, I locked myself in my truck and called the cops right away. When they realized what I was doing, SIL started pounding on my window, screaming at me to stop. "You can't do this to her," she wailed. "She and Dan need the house. Why can't you just do this for Dan?" I responded with a furious, "Fuck Dan. It's my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police, all of which the 911 operator heard thanks to my window being slightly open. I told SIL if she damaged my truck, I'd sue her. That was enough to make her retreat. When the police arrived, Dan and SIL, along with their kids, had locked themselves inside my house. I explained everything to the officers, showing them my new driver's license with my current address. When we got to my front door, I saw they'd changed the lock. The old lock was lying on the porch, drilled out, and the drill they'd used was right next to it, with a complete Harbor Freight drill bit set. Could they have been any more stupid, leaving evidence like that? I pointed out the broken lock and the drill, then gave the police a rundown of all the prior events. I guess Dan had called our parents at some point after I arrived, because they showed up while I was still talking to the cops. My parents immediately lied, claiming I'd agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I simply said that was an easily provable lie, one way or another. Dan and SIL finally came out of my house, papers in hand, looking super smug, like they'd somehow outsmarted me. They'd actually drawn up and printed out a fake rental agreement, but my signature wasn't on it. Their asterisk was *1, but it looked nothing like my handwriting. I don't think any of them had ever actually seen my signature, so that was incredibly stupid on their part. I told my parents and Dan that this was blatantly obvious fraud. If the cops investigated, they'd easily figure it out, and I didn't think going to jail or court would do them any good. It could even make Dan lose his job, which was his only means of providing for his family. I also said I would get a lawyer and sue for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken, and I'd call CPS a good measure. Then went white and looked genuinely scared when I said all that. But my mother got between us and doubled down, insisting I should just do this for Dan and live in the damn camper so they could finally have a family home to themselves. I yelled at her, "If you think it's such a good idea, you do it for Dan yourself and let Dan have your house to himself instead." The cops separated my mother from me. I said I wanted them all out right now, or I'd press charges. I shouted, detailing how they drilled out my front door lock to break in, how the lease papers were obvious fakes, how they'd badly forged my signature, and how I had recorded video of SIL attacking me. "Those are felonies," I declared. "I could screw over your lives if I wanted, and if you don't leave, that's exactly what I'll do. The only reason I haven't already is for the sake of Dan's kids, so you have one chance to get the hell out." The moment my parents heard that, I think it finally clicked that they could not force me to do it for Dan. My mother surrendered, saying she'd put an end to this. She went over to SIL and spoke quietly for a minute while my father spoke to Dan. SIL instantly started loudly crying and ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits, tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell her to pick up the bits of paper or he'd cite them for littering. Both of the cops, by this point, had the "I don't get paid enough for this" looks on their faces. Dan had to start telling his kids to load their stuff back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing that he wouldn't get his own room now. SIL and Dan gathered their kids up to try and make one last pathetic attempt to guilt me with a sad family routine. You know the one, where they all gather together in a sort of group hug, all facing one direction. I swear, I think they practiced it beforehand. All the kids had the same pleading look, with quivering mouths. SIL kept rubbing her pregnant belly and tilting her head to look like a sad puppy, and my brother just made the saddest face he possibly could and said, "Please don't do this. We need to be able to live here." But I didn't falter. I told them to keep packing. All the kids and SIL turned to crying up to 11, and Dan yelled at me, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You denied us a home because you're too selfish to share and help out family." I ended up laughing like a maniac and retorting that what he was trying to do was taking asterisk, not sharing, and no amount of crying would make me let his family move in because he's no brother of mine anymore. He's just an entitled prick who thinks he can take whatever he wants from me, like when we were kids. Dan started bombing me until the cops told him to cool it. or he'd be in cuffs regardless of whether I wanted to press charges. He sucked in his lips, looking a mix of afraid and supremely pissed off. I asked the cops if they could stick around until my parents, brother, and SIL had all left, and they said they had no intention of going anywhere until this had been resolved. In fact, in the next few minutes, 2 cops became 4 as Ma drove in for whatever reason. That gave my parents some extra incentive to get moving. I made Dan give me the keys to the new lock he'd put on my front door, though I got another lock the next day anyway, just in case he had copies. He was really reluctant to hand them over, and instead he threw them down the street and into a storm drain, saying, "Go get them yourself." But one of the cops scolded him for that and made him go retrieve them. He had to pull the grate off just to get at them and got pretty dirty in the process. When he got the keys back, he just grumbled, then slammed them down into my hand. I then told them all to leave and never come back. My mother said I'd be disowned for this, as if that was some kind of threat to me. I voiced that to them. Then, in an overly sarcastic tone, I said something along the lines of, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with you guys, where I always get treated like shit by you all anyway, because Dan has always been your obvious favorite. You treated me so badly when I was growing up that if Dan ever needs an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything. So do like you always told me to do when I was mistreated by all of you, and suck it up. My parents were floored after I said all of that, and the quartet of cops were looking pretty judgmental at them as well. I tell you, if you want to put nasty parents like mine on the spot, confront them in front of cops, because they'll likely not try anything really stupid." My mother just started crying and walking away. My father just stood there looking like he wanted to hit me, and Dan just held his kids in defeat. Oh, and SIO was off having a tantrum in my front lawn. Soon enough, they all formed a line, handing out boxes and getting their stuff out of my house. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so it all was taken out pretty quickly. But while doing it, my mother kept saying it wasn't too late and I could still do it for Dan several times, each time trying to bargain more and more to make me change my mind. She said that Dan could pay me rent if I let them stay, and when that didn't work, she said I could move back in with to let Dan rent my house so I wouldn't have to share the building. I told her to shut up and keep packing boxes, because I don't want Dan or his family around. I don't want his money, and I certainly don't want to live with him or my parents ever again after the way they treated me when I was a kid. Making a deal with my parents would be like making a deal with the devil to me. SIL ended up having another tantrum after hearing that, threw a box down, then sat on the ground to have a pity party because she didn't want to go back to sharing a house with my parents. She just sat looking angry, sat there until everyone else was finished. She didn't even want to get up when it was time to leave. They finally got everything out of the house and into the truck. So, before they left, I laid into my parents one last time about all the crap they put me through growing up. And with 4 cops being right there, they couldn't do much other than stand there and take it. For once, I called them out on so many things that happened, and even pointed out how they couldn't just do something nice for me like letting me stay over with my camper when I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet, how they let Dan and SIL ridicule me and call me a bum. Well, who's a bum now? I asked. They wanted to kick me out of my own house so Dan could stay in it free of charge, yet when I needed a place to go, they wanted to gouge me for more than I could afford just to park my camper, when they knew I was out of a job. There were more extremely judgmental stares from the cops when I said all of that, so I put my parents on the spot one more time and asked them what I ever did, other than being born, to deserve being treated so badly. Because when I finally have a bit of success in life, they want to snatch it away from me for their favorite child, since they'd rather I give everything to Dan and have nothing for myself. I bought my house using the money that I earned. I owe them nothing, and I won't be asking anything from them ever again, because clearly I will never be anything more than a doormat or a cash cow in their eyes. I got no answers from them. They just stood there looking like fish out of water. So I continued ranting and asked them what in God's name made them think they were such good parents. After all of that, my father was beet red, but more from embarrassment than anger this time, and my mother was crying that she was a horrible person. I bluntly agreed that she is a horrible person. They all are, and I bet they'll go to hell for it too. They were shitty people, and they all knew it, but if I called them out on all this stuff in private instead of in public, they'd just get mad at me and still act like I'm in the wrong. They just kept up the denial for so long that it became a part of who they are. My mother buried her face in my father's jacket to cry, and my father looked more defeated than I've ever seen him. Dan and his family avoided me entirely as they finished putting everything back in the moving truck. I made sure nothing of mine was stolen. Not that I'd had a chance to get much furniture yet. I was lucky to even have a couch at that time. They all got back in their vehicles, and SIL just stood staring at me with pure malice until my brother finally got her to drive the minivan home. As soon as they were all gone, I got back online again and spilled the beans about what happened. My parents were too embarrassed to even try and defend their actions this time. While the family was somewhat split before this incident, it was now a landslide in my favor. Nearly all the family has sided with me after this incident, and those who haven't simply aren't siding with anybody. No matter how much my parents previously tried the "we did it for Dan" line, no one listened anymore. So any remaining familial support they had is now gone. Many in the family who I expected wouldn't side with me did. That includes a former flying monkeys. I guess they'd finally had enough. Around that time, I offered to host half a family at next Christmas Eve in my new house. My parents were not invited. I wasn't blocked on my brother and Syl's profiles, surprisingly, and I saw SIL had her fourth baby in early November. They are still living with my parents, and I'm pretty sure they knew I was watching, because SIL kept making passive-aggressive posts every couple of weeks or so about not having enough space while living with my parents. Probably to see if she can still guilt me. And I'm sure it's driving my mother and father up the wall because they aren't getting any peace and quiet in their old age with 3 rowdy, obnoxious kids, a mentally unstable SIL, my golden child brother, and a newborn baby in the house all at once. Perhaps they could move into a camper in their own backyard and let them take over their house completely. They might get some peace then. Yeah, they could do that for Dan. After Christmas, SIL did finally stop making posts that were obvious digs at me and deleted all the old ones as well. But shortly after the new year, she more recently made a new post complaining about how she tried to convince my parents to get a camper, like I did, so it could be set it up in the backyard and Dan and his family could use the whole house as their family home. Well, the taste of one's own medicine is never fun, because my parents turned that idea down vehemently. I hear no one is going to push them out of their asterisk own home, let alone their master bedroom. The post was only up for a couple of days before SIL removed it, and she has hardly posted anything since then. She loves to complain, but if a tree falls and no one is around to hear it, can it still complain? SIL, I guess, has realized there's no point in doing it when no one hears her anymore, and Dan can't afford to move his family out on his salary alone anytime soon. If they end up expecting another child in the next few years, I won't be surprised. Things mellowed down for me since then. I've even invited friends over for a poker night. I suck at poker because I can never remember a damn thing about it. But so what? We get to drink beer and eat junk food while being merry idiots. We all loaded up on Whoppers from Burger King and just had it the best way full-grown men can when they just want to have a good, unadulterated time and get pissed drunk. I think maybe around summer I'll look into possibly dating someone. I'm not exactly getting younger here. Fingers crossed that goes well. My camper just sits idle in my yard now, and I admit there were some days I went out there just to spend time in it. I did live in it for 2 years. It's like my second home. And maybe one day I'll actually get to use it for camping, like it was meant to be. I've never been camping. My parents considered it a waste of time, so it'd be a completely new experience for me. This pretty much marks the end of what happened. My parents, brother, and SIL have all been staying very clear of me. In fact, they seem to have gone back to acting like I don't exist, like they did before I bought a house. Not like that bothers me at all. It's better that way. But they'll inevitably come back in some way. I know they will. I just wonder what kind of stupid thing they'll do next. No, this isn't over. There are new updates. A lot of you commented asking for cameras, and I got some. Ring doorbell and a few others, just in case. So far, no one has attempted a break-in. I think the way I outed them all before scared them into leaving me alone for the most part. I've even taken to renting out 2 of the rooms in my house, one to a close friend, the other to a friend of said close friend. Both have been fantastic tenants. They know to keep quiet and leave me alone most of the time, and even have small refrigerators in their room, so they don't need to keep any of their drinks in the main fridge. The deal I gave them on rent was too good for them to pass up. It increased my monthly income, and even after taxes, I'm still putting away some decent amounts in the bank, since the rent money pays a good chunk of my monthly mortgage. You're all probably wondering how my parents, brother, and SIL took to me renting out those rooms to friends. Well, the answer is, not well. My father and Dan stayed out of it, but SIL freaked out, which made my mother come crying to me over how I could have rented those rooms to Dan and his family instead. We had a bit of an argument in which I pointed out, for one thing, they broke into my house before to try and steal it. Who would want to let someone who did that move in with her? Also, there wasn't enough room for me, Dan, and his entire family in my house. Not that I'd ever share a roof with him anyway. It's a 3-bedroom manufactured home, no less. I have the master bedroom and its adjoining bathroom. That would have left only 2 small rooms for Dan, SIL, and 4 kids. Not to mention, they'd be annoying as to me all the time. Also, she knows very well I can't be around SIL because she intentionally antagonized me, and they all mocked me when I was homeless before. Besides, my current tenants are both single guys in their 30s I get along with. My mother had some sobbing excuses for a while, but she finally let it go and admitted she was just desperate. My parents found out I was renting rooms out because SIL basically stalked me, then told my parents, who then contacted me, and then my mother came over to cry about it. Since then, my parents haven't bothered me once about the house, so things are good for me. My parents and Dan? Not so much. It turns out SIL is a far worse person than even I thought. I already knew she was a gaslighting, self-victimizing drama queen, but she sank even lower because Dan's youngest child turned out not to be as the yeah. You all read that correctly. SIL had an affair, which, in retrospect, isn't all that surprising, and something a few people here totally called months ago. After being caught, SIL was ousted from the family, then just recently finished with his divorce, which actually went in his favor, since we thankfully live in a fault state. Dan also sued to get his name taken off the birth certificate of the youngest child, and won. Basically, after the incident where my parents tried to force me to hand over my house, things got pretty tumultuous over at their house. SIL blamed me a lot. She was convinced, somehow, that I had tons of money, like I'd won the lottery or something, and that I should share the wealth. Apparently, it was her idea that they come to my Christmas party, because she hoped they could all try to get on my good side. It was also her idea to make my parents and Dan try to get money from me for an apartment, so it really burst her bubble when Dan and my parent informed her of how my finances actually were. For the longest time, she had Dan and my parents fully engulfed in her toxic mindset and only fed their narcissism with her own. So her blaming me made the rest of them blame me. That is, until what happened in front of the police when they tried to steal my house. That's when the downfall for SIL really started. My parents and Dan were apprehensive about coming to my Christmas party after the way I'd outed them, but SIL convinced them to just throw together a few cheap gifts from what they could get at the last minute and just show up, because he'd never throw us out once we're already there. Boy, was she wrong. She gambled on that plan, and I, with the complete blessings of everyone I'd invited, threw her and the rest of them out. Her plan, which she no doubt thought was the most clever thing ever, backfired in her face spectacularly. I guess being chewed out by family at my party not only wrecked my parents' reputation even more, it actually started a wake-up call for them to eventually not listen to SIL anymore. As I said in my last post, my parents decided on going back to church, perhaps because last year I'd said they'd probably go to hell for their actions. I can't say that's the real reason, but you've got to admit it would feel kind of satisfying if that was the case. My parents hadn't been to church in 2 decades before going back. While I don't think it a bad idea that they're going to church, they need to understand that going doesn't just give them a do-over for all the crap they've done in the past. But I have a little faith they're at least trying, because my parents came to my house without Dan to personally apologize to me after they'd seen an animated video of my first 3 posts. That's right, they've known about this Reddit account for a long time now. They also know everything I'm saying. Yes, they're unhappy about it, but I feel everyone here deserves an update since it's anonymous. For my parents and Dan, watching animated video of themselves and their own actions was a great way to make them see what kind of people they really are. And they came over to apologize to me later. I'd never seen my father apologize like that to anyone, and the man isn't a good actor, So this felt genuine. They fully acknowledged what they did to me and how there's no excuse for any of it. They even described themselves as narcissists and admitted the truth that they had wronged me very badly. Then they went on to blame SIL for a lot of things. Yeah, they kind of threw her under the bus, but it's not like she wasn't guilty of everything they said. My parents have been getting counseling for a while now too and did offer group family counseling, but I declined as I'm not ready for that anytime soon. Dan himself didn't apologize to me for some time, but he looked extremely remorseful anytime the past was brought up. Meanwhile, Dan and Sil's marriage absolutely fell apart. It wasn't a crumble, it was a cascade. Without me as a scapegoat black sheep ATM that they couldn't mock or try to get money from anymore, and after the public humiliation of social media, my Reddit post, and the animated online video, SIL finally let out enough of a toxic behavior on Dan and my parents for them to realize she's not the person they thought she was. Their denial had been strong, but Sil's entitlement was stronger. I had many a thought of lightsabers clashing over this drama, SIL clad like a bimbo sith with a lightsaber that looks like a giant lipstick or something like that. I imagine there's a wealth of puns and jokes to be had there, but I really didn't bother to think much more detail about it. But as you can imagine, things only got worse because SIL kept looking for other ways to get what she wanted. She kept bringing up ads for used campers and RVs to try and get my parents to buy one to live out of so they could have a main house. And she kept doing this no matter how many times they told her to stop. She even tried to say my parents should just buy an RV and have a life on the road like normal old people do. That was stupid, even for SIL. The opposite was suggested by my parents, that Dan and SIL buy a camper themselves to live out of instead. SIL basically said she shouldn't have to do that since she's a mom. She pretty much lauded the fact that she thought she had total parental authority over everyone's heads because the kids in the house were all hers. And when SIL didn't get her way, she actually took her baby and left the house to disappear for several days. They knew she was fine because her phone was still working and she was responding texts with short but passive-aggressive answers. And when she came back, she was only more embittered because nobody caved to her demands while she was away. SIL also refused to go to church, but Dan went with our parents and took his kids along as well, save for the youngest, since SIL refused to let him take the baby anywhere. Things really hit the fan when Dan suddenly called out his wife as a cheater in March. This shocked us all, because we thought he was a complete pushover to her. But no, he's not. At least, not anymore. You all know how he treated me when I was on his bad side. Well, his wife wasn't spared that at all. He started putting pieces together about her deceit after finally pulling his head out of his ass, and secretly got DNA tests for all his kids. 3 of the kids are his, but the youngest one, the baby, was not. For the record, Dan and I both have pretty dark, straight hair that's almost black. Same with our parents. Sil's hair is straight and pretty dark too, but the baby's hair is lighter and a bit curly. At first, Dan just thought it was because of the baby's age. SIL kept playing it off and said that it would darken in time, but the baby's hair never got darker. I guess that was Dan's biggest clue. He confronted his wife with a DNA result in front of our parents, and she broke down sobbing that it was a mistake. SIL pulled out all the Davos stops of denying, trickle-truthing, and gaslighting, but Dan had none of it. He'd actually done more asterisk to find out about her affair than I would have ever thought. I knew he was smart. He just let himself be dumb. He had detailed proof of her cheating with phone records, texts he got off her phone, bank records, and the DNA test. He even identified the man she was cheating with, who is likely the father, since he has much lighter-colored, curly hair. The evidence against her was crystal clear, and Dan said she was so bad at hiding her affair he didn't even have a hard time figuring any of it out once he started looking. My parents demanded that SIL leave their house immediately. That's when she went psycho on them all. First, just yelling, but she quickly got physical. Police had to be called by my mother, and yeah, SIL was arrested. She scratched up Dan and my father quite a bit with her long fake nails, and even harmed her eldest kid in the crossfire by hitting him hard enough to have a black eye and nosebleed when he tried to intervene. Dan was smart enough to have his phone recording nearby when he confronted her, so the police had all they needed to arrest her for assault. Sil's parents had to drive over to bail her out. Then they came back for the baby, Sil's stuff, and her car as well. A couple days after SIL got bailed out, she showed up at my house, because I was apparently next on her hate list. As soon as I opened the door, She went on a delusional rant where she called me out about posting on Reddit, then said I was the entitled bane of her existence. I'm not sure, but I think she might have been high on something, because this felt extra crazy for her, and her eyes didn't look right. She claimed mothers with young children are the most sacred thing in the world, then went on yelling that giving up my house shouldn't have been too much to ask for, because supporting the family was the least I could have done, and if I had, then her family would still be together. When I tried to talk while she was spewing all that out, she actually attempted to shove me and cover my mouth. She even had her hand poised like she was ready to scratch me. Well, that went about as well with me as you can expect. I'm not exactly one to be threatened. I told her I'd call the police if she didn't take her hands off me. Right that moment. I also told her I'd got it all on my doorbell camera. She started panicking the moment she heard camera. Then I ended up verbally savaging her to the point she was backing off my porch. I told her she had some goal to call me entitled when she's exactly that. She didn't work for anything she had, cheated on her husband and got pregnant from her affair partner, made my mother do most of the parenting for her children, spent Dan's money till they were in a financial hole, and acted entitled to my home to the point of trying to steal it. I called her entitled X1000 and that she's a greedy bitch who is blinded by narcissism. Then I told her to stop blaming me for her own actions and to never show up at my house again. Being told all that was pretty much all SIL needed to hear before jumping back into her car, then peeled out and sped off. This was finally the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Now that she was separated from Dan, I ended up finally going to the police and filing a report on her for harassment and the assault she'd done on me last year. And her putting her hands on me at my front porch only added to it. The police have it all on record now, and I gave copies of the video to Dan for his divorce lawyer. And yes, I did file for a restraining order against SIL. It was easily granted because it was obvious the woman is unhinged. She's not made a social media post about me since that I could see, but that's just because she put her profile on private. I hope her blame ship against me has long since sailed. Either way, she's left me alone. SIL was still with her affair partner during the divorce. At the time, I had no real idea of what kind of man he is, but any person who monkeys with someone else's spouse and even as a child with them really doesn't have a lot of morals to begin with. Once the divorce was underway, SIL admitted that Dan just wasn't man enough for her anymore because he couldn't afford to give her the lifestyle she wanted. She actually believed herself to be on the level of a trophy wife and that she deserves to be with someone wealthy. Dan said he pulled an Amy Schumer and maniacally laughed at her. He said she was nowhere near hot enough to be a trophy wife, along with mentioning any other fault she had. SIL ended up humiliated by this and ran off like a child. Due to having to live with her parents, SIL was forced to work in their family business because Dan wasn't giving her access to his bank accounts anymore. She'd already maxed out all the credit cards he previously gave her, and she griped about having to work for her parents despite having a college degree. But I think they were the only ones who'd employ her anyway, since she's got a criminal record and a decade-long gap in her resume. I've heard from Dan that her parents were severely disappointed in her as well, but that was just a rumor. They could be just as bad as her for all I know. Either way, the shit show of a divorce really took off once it got going. SIL didn't walk away with much from it, especially because she had an affair, physically hurt her now ex-husband and eldest child, and it's a false state like I mentioned earlier. So she kissed any chance of getting her way goodbye. Dan's lawyer pulled some strings to get the divorce started as fast as possible, but it cost him. I don't know the more specific details or how much it all cost. They never told me. SIL, on the other hand, was financially backed into a corner very badly. And you know what can happen when you corner an animal? She fought back, but the law was not on her side, nor was it dwindling finances. Syl's parents had to pay for a lawyer for her, and not a very good one either. Also, she actually brought her affair partner to the divorce court to testify on her behalf. This guy was a real piece of work. He had a bronze tongue and a charming smile he tried to use to his advantage. He claimed SIL had been wronged by an incompetent husband, which is why she sought the arms of another man. He claimed he was ready to take responsibility for his child he had fathered with SIL, but that SIL would still be needing the alimony for helping support herself and care for said child. He remarked that because Dan at the time was still on the birth certificate, alimony should be one of his obligations. Dan said this guy used big word and a charming smile, but seemed an extra special kind of stupid. And coming from Dan, that's saying something. The judge was also not swayed in the slightest and told the bronze-tongued man that he was a hypocrite for saying he was ready to take responsibility for his own child while also holding his hand out for money from a man whose marriage he'd helped ruin. That shut him up. Dan was prepared to sue his wife's affair partner for alienation of affection too. However, that fell through. I guess it would have been on Dan to prove how much he loved him before the affair started. But after her mask came off and we saw the real her, we're not sure she ever really loved him at all, or she just loved having a meal ticket. Someone here pointed out SIL probably kept popping out kids to avoid getting a job, and you may have been right. Either way, SIL tried dragging out the divorce, but Dan's lawyer and the judge kept it from happening much. I swear Dan must have seriously lucked out, because he got one of the meanest and most unsympathetic to cheaters judges in the state, and all the evidence we had on SIL made it easy to keep her from playing the victim. So instead, she just let her real nasty self out, since there was no point in hiding it anymore. The court had all the record provided by Dan and myself, police reports, photos, and recordings to prove she was an abusive narcissist. There was a mountain against SIL that she had no way to climb over or hike around. She tried standing against the mountain, but that was prime avalanche territory. In the end of the divorce, SIL struck a deal to end things quick. Dan takes 3/4 of the credit card debt, gets his name off the affair baby's birth certificate, and SIL walked away with only partial custody of her children, no alimony, but also without most of the credit debt she racked up. Her being legally employed by her parents meant she had an income of her own to fall back on to start paying off her debts. She can see her other kids almost whenever she wants and can take them on weekends, but for whatever reason, hers made very few attempts to even see them. She took them out to eat fast food a few times, but she never took them home with her. The kids are back in school now, so that gives her even less opportunities to see them. You'd think her parents would want to see their grandchildren, but they haven't contacted Dan about it. They barely saw Dan's children before that, too. Now they may not even bother to see them at all. Do they hate kids or something? Even Dan doesn't know, but he tells me that his in-laws were always indifferent to him. As for Dan, well, he really did love his wife a lot, so the betrayal of her cheating made him hit the bottle hard. Rewind back to the night of his confrontation with his wife. He came to me in a stupor with a whiskey bottle in hand, and his face all scratched up and covered in bandages. I wouldn't say he was drunk yet, but I freaked out seeing him looking like that at first. Then I berated him for driving under the influence, but that didn't really mean much to him compared to the betrayal of his cheating harlot of a soon-to-be ex-wife. We spent a few hours hanging out in my camper so as not to disturb my tenants. All the while Dan was drinking whiskey straight from the bottle and crying that he's a fool and how he regretted ever marrying SIL. Pretty much any time he mentions her now, he just refers to her as that bitch, so that's SIL's nickname now. Ironically, this time together was the most bonding Dan and I have done in 15 years. While he didn't exactly apologize to me, he called himself a shitty human being with terrible taste in women, then said I at least didn't make his mistakes. Despite all he previously did to me, he's still my younger brother, and I couldn't risk letting him try to drive home. So I told him to stay the night and managed to take his keys, then set up the bunk in my camper for him to use. I rented out my spare rooms after all. He was in no shape to drive home, and if he'd taken an Uber, he'd have to pay for it and then have to come back for his car later. He was still a depressed, crying mess and didn't want our parents or his kids to see him like that. And frankly, I was worried he'd do something insanely stupid if I let him leave. I didn't want him to sleep in the house, so putting him in the camper was the best option. Just because that bitch screwed him over doesn't mean I suddenly trusted him, so better for him to sleep it off in the camper. We both spent time in the camper playing games and watching movies on my portable DVD player. Poker was no fun with just two people, and Old Maid was just boring. Thankfully, I had an Uno Deck 2 and an old-school battleship game. He really liked those. It was enough to keep him distracted until he was finally willing to lay down after running out of whiskey. He threw up a lot of it in a bucket anyway. But he was not opposed to sleeping in my camper. In fact, he found the idea kinda cool. Dan had a lot of questions for me as to how I'd lived in the camper for as long as I did, and I answered them all, if not just to keep him busy. But I needed to go to bed myself since I had to be up early. So I left him with my portable DVD player and a couple of movies. That way he could amuse himself alone for a while, if he even managed to stay awake. Before leaving for work in the morning, I popped in while Dan was passed out in the bunk and left a bottle of ibuprofen and an energy drink on the counter of the campus kitchenette, along with his car keys and a letter explaining to leave through the backyard gate. He saw himself out without trouble around 1:30 p.m. About a month after XSIL, aka that bitch, was kicked out, Dan came to me asking to borrow my camper. I guess he found it more comfortable than I thought when he slept in it. And he fully admitted he didn't ask soon out of pride. But with his soon-to-be ex-wife out of the house, he decided to give up his room for his eldest kid. He's got 2 girls and a boy, with the boy being the eldest and now 8 years old. The kids were all forced to share a room until that point. They just had curtains up for the boy's half of the room, but the boy often slept on the couch to avoid his sisters. I know the poor kid was really desperate for his own room, so I guess Dan decided to finally make a better decision as a dad and came to see me in order to beg to borrow my camper so his son could have his room. If he could have afforded it, he'd have bought his own camper instead of relying on me, and even said as much. I hadn't even gotten the chance to use a camper for actual camping yet, but I caved and let him use it since it was actually for a good cause, and he promised to buy his own in time anyway. No, I didn't ask for rent money for the camper. Dan is in enough of a financial hole as it is right now. XSIL and the divorce drained him, and I've learned that I get far better results with family lately by not being spiteful. I loaded my camper up and put it down in my parents' backyard, and my father put in a 30-amp breaker so it'll have enough power for Dan to run heat and AC when he needs it. I do miss the camper after all that time living in it. It kind of felt like it was a part of me. But the only reason I loaned it out was for the sake of Dan's kids. Pretty much the only reason I still do anything for my parents or Dan is for the sake of those kids, as I bonded with them. And yes, I know I may not get the camper back for quite some time, and likely not in the kind of condition I lent it out in. But I warned Dan and my parents that they will be financially responsible for any damage they do to the camper, as well as its upkeep for as long as they have it. I also took many timestamp pictures and video of the camper inside and outside before lending it out so I can prove its condition before it left. Dan even recorded a video with me agreeing to my terms, so that's as good as a contract. With the financial drain of the divorce, Dan's not going to be able to get a place of his own for years, I'll bet, though he seems to have no complaints about living in the camper at least. But I don't know if he actually likes it, or if it's just putting up a front. But I can guess it reminds him of the backyard forts we had as kids, since that's how it felt with me sometimes. Either way, he's living in it now. I did get some major props from the extended family for letting him borrow it too. I'm now referred to by a lot of them as a good brother Dan doesn't deserve. Either way, I think getting rid of SIL was a great first step in mending the family as a whole. I still have little care for my brother and parents after the way they treated me all my life, but I'm not going to let Dan's kids suffer for it. Those kids have actually really warmed up to me. They're actually happy to see me when I come over or when they visit me. I've even babysat a few times. Now that they don't have their mother's toxic presence around, they become much nicer kids, especially to me. I'm actually getting to enjoy being an uncle now. My mother is still doing the bulk of the parenting for my nibblings, and she's been acting as nice as possible to get on my good side. My father often looks very defeated in my presence, but otherwise has been either stoically quiet or just generally nice to me. But he won't talk to me much, though that's leagues better than how he was before. At least I'm not letting my guard down either way. My parents do seem more happy that my XSIL is gone, and they often say they don't know what they ever saw in her. My mother especially, because the two of them butted heads over who was mom in the house for a long time. Now, for the last part. At the same time as the divorce, Dan sued to have his name removed from the birth certificate of the baby that wasn't his. That bitch didn't really want to change it because it meant no more child support from Dan, as she did. However, there was a court-ordered paternity test for the man identified as the baby's father. I was prepared to laugh in case it turned out he wasn't the father either, but he was. And Dan's lawyer had a long talk with XSIL's lawyer. XSIL had no leg to stand on, and Dan was ready to go to bat to make her situation even worse. She didn't have the finances to fight him any longer and agreed to changing the birth certificate. The bronze-tongued man who'd knocked her up did man up to take financial responsibility as a parent, but he ended up not staying with SIL. He contacted Dan through his lawyer to tell him he'd broken up with that bitch and that he wouldn't bother him again. I checked the social media of that guy after Dan linked me to it, and the man was upset that now he's financially responsible for a child he never planned to have and that is too young for this. Guys, from what Dan's lawyer was able to find out, that man is just over 40. He looks younger than he is, but is by no means a young man. Shortly after that, he put his online profile on private. XSIL did the same with hers a long time prior, so I have no more information left to give. This may be the end. XSIL is out of our hair. My parents and brother have finally made a real effort to be better people. I'm surprisingly happy as an uncle, and my house is still my house. XSIL saw my Reddit posts. She can't contact me about them in any way but with a lawyer, thanks to my restraining order against her. And she likely can't afford to get a lawyer right now anyway since the divorce financially drained her too. So she bitched to Dan about it and demanded he tell me to delete my Reddit account. But not only has Dan read my recent posts, he no longer cares. He said they serve as a reminder of the prick he used to be, and is not losing sleep about it. Besides, I've still helped him out despite all he's done to me, so he is not going to be upset about it. My parents have also made sure to try and treat Dan and I more equally when I'm around too. My father is still a man of few words around me, though someone pointed out that changing now after so long of treating me as the opposite of Dan means he doesn't know how to connect with me anymore, and I think they are right. I don't mind the way he is now, though. My mother has also developed a habit of saying she's sorry about every little thing in my presence, then told me that she and my father have been reamed a lot by extended family and their counselor, and now my mother feels like she needs to apologize for everything. This is all a stark contrast to how they used to treat me. Also, I didn't talk before about what XSIL's opinion was on Dan borrowing my camper so his son could have his in XSIL's old bedroom. Well, like a stereotypical bully, she looked down on him and mocked him about it because now he's living like a bum, as she put it. But Dan took it in stride and asked if she was done yet, because he knew this was exactly how she'd react, and he just plain doesn't care anymore. She's borderline dead to him, and her insults were on deaf ears. Then he pointed out to her that he was living out of the camper because he was putting his kids ahead of himself so his son could have his own room, something his ex never did despite being their mother. She just weaponized her children and pregnancy to keep from working and to emotionally blackmail everyone. Then he asked her to remind him how asterisk was working out for her. Mind you, this was early on in their divorce. I'm sure you can all guess her reaction. Dan said his ex did have quite the tantrum about my recent posts, but no one has bothered to contact me on her behalf to take them down, so she just has to live with her well-deserved shame. She has been trying to act nicer to Dan lately. I guess the grass isn't so green living with her parents. Dan tolerates her as a mother of his children whenever they meet, but nothing more. He will never take her back. He has told me that he can never look at her like he used to, and the very thought of her turns him off emotionally. So XSIL pretty much has no chance of reconciliation. I have no new info on XSIL's affair partner. His social media is still locked down. Same with XSIL's, and it's likely to remain that way as long as I have a chance of reading them. Finally, an update on a petty incident. It happened in the middle of the night, very early morning on the 1st of the month. I suspect it was my XSIL, but the person my cameras recorded was wearing layers of heavy sweats and had their face wrapped up, along with big glasses covering the eyes. You couldn't really tell if they were a man or woman. They came on foot too, so no identifying a car. They did look about XSIL's height, though, but that's not much in the way of evidence on its own. If it was XSIL, she knew about my cameras, so covering her face and body for petty, eggy revenge was probably the smartest thing she's done in years. Way to finally put her college degree to use by egging a beat-up old pickup truck. The egger showed up around 3 a.m. I was deep asleep and didn't hear anything. Whoever it was had appeared that night quickly threw a dozen eggs or so all over my truck. They didn't attempt to do any more damage at least, and were gone in a flash as soon as the last egg was thrown. I didn't see the mess till I was leaving for work in the morning. I ran my truck through a local car wash during my lunch break. That took most of the egg off, but I had to scrub it a bit more later after work. Egg really isn't good for the paint, but the truck is from the 90s and doesn't exactly look mint anyway. I did take photos and filed a police report with the CCTV footage as evidence, but so far nothing has come of it. There was no real damage other than my minor irritation and $15 at a car wash. If XSIL did do this, Then she was smart enough to only throw eggs and not key my paint or slash my tires, so my insurance wouldn't be involved. I don't think much will come of the police report, as the cops seem to dismiss it as a probable prank by a teenager. I get they were probably overworked, but at least the report will keep a paper trail in case of future incidents. I waited till now to post because I wondered if anything else would happen, but no, just right back to peace and quiet. I asked around with some people on the street about cameras possibly seeing the person who egged my car. Responses range from "we don't have cameras" to "it was Halloween" and "people pull stupid pranks. Let it go." The few people who were helpful told me that I waited way too long to ask and the footage auto-deleted. So basically, the egger got away. But if it was SIL, I'm guessing she had to walk around a half-mile in those sweats just to not get her car spotted on camera or something. It wouldn't surprise me if she questioned if it was even worth the effort. Oh well, I guess I'll just wait and see if the egger comes back next year. I did hand out printed pictures of the egger, though, and even taped a few up on posts, so now people in my neighborhood are aware. At least the tenants renting out 2 rooms in my house have stayed out of it, and I don't really blame them. It's not their problem. So, after all that, here I am. My life is stable, peaceful, and truly my own. It wasn't the way I imagined, and it certainly wasn't easy, but sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most unexpected rewards. I learned that standing up for myself, no matter how intimidating the adversary, even if it's your own family, is always worth it. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well, while watching those who tried to tear you down finally face the consequences of their own actions. What do you all think? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with family, or deal with someone so entitled they thought they could just take what was yours? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below.